The night crackled with anticipation. The air was thick with electricity, as if something big was about to unfold. Thousands of voices rose in a deafening roar, chanting, waving banners, their eyes locked onto the man they had come to see, Donald Trump. Camera flashes lit up the sky, flags rippling like waves in a political storm. But tonight, something unexpected was about to happen. A shift, a moment no one saw coming. The spotlight moved, not to the former president, but to someone standing quietly in the background, Barron Trump. No one expected him to speak. No one thought he would take the stage. And certainly, no one imagined that he would soon find himself in the crosshairs of some of the most ruthless journalists in the country. A sudden hush fell over the crowd as the first question was fired. It was a trap carefully crafted, designed to corner him, to force him into a misstep that would dominate headlines for days. Then came another, and another, each question more pointed than the last. The journalists smelled blood, waiting for the moment when the youngest Trump would falter, when the weight of scrutiny would become too much. But what happened next shocked everyone. Instead of stumbling, instead of retreating, Barron Trump did something no one could have predicted. With a calm that was almost unnerving, he took control of the moment, turning the entire exchange on its head. His words didn't just deflect the attacks, they shifted the entire conversation. For the first time, the journalists were the ones left speechless. So, what exactly did he say? How did an 18-year-old, with little media experience, manage to outmaneuver some of the most seasoned political reporters? And more importantly, what does this moment mean for his future? Stay with us as we break down one of the most astonishing and unexpected moments in modern politics. The night was thick with energy. A charged atmosphere pulsing through the massive crowd gathered in Florida, a key battleground state where political passions run deep. Tens of thousands of supporters filled the rally grounds, their voices merging into a powerful chorus of chants and cheers. Red, white, and blue banners rippled in the night air, illuminated by the brilliant glare of stage lights. "Make America Great Again," signs waved high above the sea of people, reflecting the flash of 100 cameras eager to capture every moment. On stage, the podium stood as the epicenter of the spectacle. This was Donald Trump's moment. His rally, his stage. Supporters braced for the fiery speech they had come to expect. One filled with bold promises, sharp attacks on political rivals, and the kind of electrifying rhetoric that had defined his previous campaigns. The anticipation was thick. Then, something unexpected happened. Just beyond the stage, in the family section, stood an unlikely figure, Barron Trump. At 18 years old, he was taller than most around him, his posture composed, his gaze steady as he took in the scene before him. Unlike his father, he had rarely been seen in public, let alone in a political setting of this magnitude. His presence alone was enough to spark murmurs among those who noticed. But then, from the far side of the crowd, a sudden movement, a group of journalists poised, prepared, and waiting for their moment. Microphones raised, cameras zooming in. The rally was about to take a dramatic turn. What had started as a celebration of Trump's campaign was about to become something else entirely. The spotlight was shifting, and within moments, Barron Trump would find himself at the center of an intense media confrontation, one that no one saw coming. For years, Barron Trump had remained a mystery, a figure rarely seen and even more rarely heard. Unlike his older siblings, who had actively participated in media interviews and public appearances, Barron had largely stayed out of the political spotlight, shielded from the relentless scrutiny that came with the Trump name. That's why, when he was spotted at this high-profile rally in Florida, his presence alone was enough to spark curiosity. At 6'7", his towering frame was hard to miss, yet he carried himself with a quiet, almost effortless composure. Unlike the fiery energy that often surrounded his father, Barron stood with an air of calm detachment, his expression unreadable as he observed the crowd. It wasn't just his height or his presence that drew attention, it was the fact that no one expected him to be there. And even fewer expected him to play any role that night. The speculation started almost immediately. Was he finally stepping into the political arena? Was this a calculated move by the Trump campaign? Or was he simply there as a supportive son? Nothing more? As the rally progressed, the camera operators always on the hunt for the night's most compelling shots began to shift their focus. At first, it was subtle, just the occasional pan toward the family section. But then, as Barron's name began to trend on social media in real time, the attention became more deliberate. Slow zoom-ins, longer shots, lingering close-ups. The curiosity in the air was palpable. But no one, not the journalists, not the audience, and perhaps not even Barron himself, could have predicted what was about to happen next. In a matter of moments, he would go from an observer to the center of one of the most talked about media showdowns in recent history. The murmurs in the crowd grew quieter, replaced by a sense of growing anticipation. The spotlight, once fixed on Donald Trump, was now shifting toward his youngest son, a young man who had, until now, remained an enigma. Then came the journalists. A small but determined group began to move, weaving through the sea of supporters, their microphones raised, their cameras already rolling. At the center of this media onslaught was Linda Carter, a veteran reporter known for her aggressive tactics, someone who had built a reputation by putting high-profile figures on the defensive. Tonight, she had a new target. Her strategy and that of the journalists around her was clear: corner Barron Trump, pressure him, and get a reaction. A misstep, a flustered response, even a moment of hesitation could be twisted into the headline they were after. Then, the first question hit. Small diamond, Barron, do you believe your father is dividing America? The moment the words left the reporter's mouth, a hush fell over the crowd. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even those who had only been half paying attention suddenly turned their full focus to the young man in the family section. Barron remained still, his expression unreadable. But the journalists weren't going to give him a moment to breathe. Another question came, this time sharper, more pointed. Small diamond, is your family using power for personal gain? A few uneasy murmurs rippled through the audience. It was clear what was happening now. This wasn't just curiosity, this was an attack. Linda Carter stepped forward, sensing the moment, her voice cutting through the silence. Small diamond, do you even understand politics? Or are you just privileged? This time, the words hung in the air, heavier than before. The intent was clear: strip him down, reduce him to nothing more than a last name, a legacy, an inheritance. The crowd's silence was deafening. Some waited for Barron to stumble, expecting him to be caught off guard. Others clenched their fists, willing him to hold his ground. The cameras zoomed in. The journalists leaned in, eyes sharp, waiting. The cameras zoomed, recording every breath, every flicker of emotion. This was it, the moment they had prepared for. They had set the trap. Now, they waited for Barron to walk right into it. The tension in the air was almost suffocating. Thousands of eyes locked onto one person, a young man who, until now, had been more of a shadow in the public sphere than a political figure. The journalists had fired their questions like bullets, expecting him to flinch, to hesitate, to stumble into their carefully laid trap. But Barron didn't flinch. He didn't panic. He didn't shuffle uncomfortably or glance toward his father for help. Instead, he smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile, nor was it one of arrogance. It was the kind of smile that belonged to someone who saw the game being played and knew exactly how to respond. For a moment, he let the silence stretch. Then, he took a step forward. His hands, casually slipped into his pockets, exuded an almost unnerving sense of control. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, deliberate. Tell me something, Barron said, his voice smooth, steady. Is a person's worth measured only by the name they inherit? The question landed like a hammer. The journalists, so eager to put him on the defensive, suddenly found themselves disarmed. The question wasn't a deflection, it was a shift in the conversation. One they hadn't been prepared for. For the first time that night, Linda Carter hesitated. She had expected excuses, awkward dodging, maybe even frustration. Instead, Barron had turned the scrutiny back on them, forcing them to rethink the very premise of their attack. The audience leaned in, captivated. This wasn't just a young man defending himself. This was a young man taking control of the moment. Small Diamond, I think the real question, he continued, scanning the crowd with measured confidence, is whether we choose to judge people based on the circumstances of their birth or on what they stand for. A murmur rippled through the hall. It wasn't just supporters clapping anymore. Even those who had expected him to crumble were now watching with newfound respect. Barron hadn't dodged the questions. He had redirected the entire conversation. And for the first time, the journalists were the ones left searching for a response. For a moment, the air stood still. The journalists, who had expected to corner Barron Trump into a moment of weakness, found themselves facing something entirely different. He wasn't flustered. He wasn't searching for an answer. He was taking control. With quiet confidence, Barron let his gaze sweep across the crowd. His presence, already commanding, now felt undeniable. He had been handed an opportunity not just to defend himself, but to say something that truly mattered. Then, he began to speak. Small Diamond, we hear a lot about division in America. We hear it every day from politicians, from the media, from people who would rather keep us apart than bring us together. His voice was calm, but it carried weight. Small Diamond, but division isn't caused by one person, one family, or one political party. Division happens when we stop listening to each other, when we decide that people who disagree with us are enemies instead of fellow Americans. And that's the real problem. The audience was silent now, not out of boredom, but because they were listening. The real America, Barron continued, his voice steady, but carrying something deeper, something raw. It isn't numbers on a news report, or talking points in a debate. It's the fathers who wake up before dawn, put in 14-hour shifts, and still come home exhausted but proud. It's the single mothers who juggle 2 jobs, stretching every dollar to keep their children's dreams alive. It's the soldier who returns from war, carrying invisible scars that most will never see but who keeps fighting for a country he still believes in. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd. A handful of people nodded, their faces thoughtful. Barron paused, letting his words settle before he continued. Small Diamond, so when people say that my family doesn't care about this country, I have one question in return: who will speak for them? Who will stand up for the millions of Americans who work hard every day? Who sacrifice? Who believe in this country even when they feel like no one is listening? The tension in the room had completely shifted. Barron wasn't just answering the journalists, he was speaking directly to the people. And they were feeling every single word. Linda Carter, the journalist who had led the charge against him, was watching with sharp eyes. She had come prepared for a defensive, emotional reaction. Instead, Barron Trump had flipped the script. Then, he delivered his most powerful line yet. Small Diamond, if we refuse to listen, we are the ones hurting this country, not any politician. The silence cracked. It started with a single clap, then another, and another. Within seconds, the entire crowd erupted into thunderous applause. Some people rose to their feet. Others turned to each other in amazement. Barron Trump, an 18-year-old who had barely spoken publicly before, had just commanded the attention of thousands. Even the journalists, some of whom had been ready to paint him as nothing more than a privileged teenager, had no immediate rebuttal. They had expected hesitation, maybe even defiance. What they got instead was conviction. And in that moment, Barron Trump wasn't just the son of a former president. He was his own voice, his own presence, and, perhaps, something more than anyone had anticipated. For the first time that night, Linda Carter had no words. She had come prepared to dismantle Barron Trump, to expose him as inexperienced, unprepared, and out of his depth. But now, standing before her was a young man who had turned their attack into an opportunity, seizing control of the conversation with a quiet confidence that none of them had expected. Linda Carter's grip tightened on her microphone. She opened her mouth, then hesitated. For the first time in her career, she had no words. Barron had done more than just deflect their questions. He had dismantled the entire premise of their attack. The other journalists lowered their microphones, their once persistent expressions shifting into something more uncertain. Some exchanged quick glances. silently acknowledging that the narrative had slipped through their fingers. They had come to corner Barron Trump. Yet now, they were the ones struggling to find the right words. The crowd had already decided the victor. The thunderous applause continued to roll through the rally grounds, growing louder as more people rose to their feet. It wasn't just Trump supporters cheering anymore. Even those who had doubted Barron, who had expected him to falter, now found themselves acknowledging what had just happened. And backstage, Donald Trump stood watching, arms crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable, but those who knew him well would have recognized it immediately: the slight nod of approval, the flicker of a smile that barely tugged at the corners of his lips. He had been in these situations before. He knew how brutal the press could be. But tonight, he didn't have to step in to defend his son. Barron had done it himself. And in that moment, one thing became clear to everyone in the room. This was no longer just a story about Donald Trump. It was the moment Barron Trump had stepped into the spotlight on his own terms. Within minutes, the moment was everywhere. Clips of Barron Trump's poised response flooded social media, spreading like wildfire. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, every platform was ablaze with reactions. Some videos racked up millions of views in just hours, with headlines capturing the moment. Small Diamond: Barron Trump silences ruthless journalists with one powerful speech. Small Diamond: 18-year-old Barron Trump leaves reporters speechless. A star is born? Small Diamond: Trump's son breaks his silence. And no one expected this. Supporters hailed it as a defining moment. They praised Barron's composure, intelligence, and ability to handle pressure under the unforgiving glare of the media. Some even began to speculate. Small Diamond: could Barron Trump have a future in politics? Small Diamond: like father, like son? But critics weren't silent either. Some downplayed the moment, calling it nothing more than a well-rehearsed performance. Others questioned his authenticity, claiming that he had been coached for months to handle the press. Certain media outlets scrambled to reframe the narrative, shifting their focus from Barron's words to his father's ongoing controversies. Yet, one thing was undeniable: the world was now paying attention to Barron Trump in a way it never had before. For years, he had stayed in the shadows, a quiet figure in the background of his father's presidency. But now, that had changed. Whether people admired him, doubted him, or questioned his future, one thing was clear: Barron Trump had just had his breakout moment. And the debate was only just beginning. As the dust settles on this unforgettable moment, one thing is clear: this wasn't just about politics. It was about something bigger. Barron Trump didn't just answer questions that night. He sparked a conversation. Because at its core, politics isn't just about policies, elections, or party lines. It's about people. It's about how we choose to see and treat one another, even when we disagree. When was the last time you listened not to argue, not to prove a point, but just to understand? Think about it, because in the end, if we stop listening, we are the ones tearing this country apart, not any politician. That's the question we should all be asking ourselves. Barron Trump's words that night weren't just a response to reporters. They were a challenge to all of us. A challenge to rethink division, to reconsider how we interact with those who hold different beliefs, and to remember that our shared future depends on our ability to listen, not just to speak. So now, we turn the conversation over to you. Do you agree with Barron's stance? Did his words change the way you see today's political climate? Or do you believe he still has more to prove? Let's discuss, but let's do it with respect. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you believe more people should hear stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, because every share doesn't just spread a story. It helps create a bigger conversation. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.